The University of California, Riverside presents Blue, Gold, and Black, the podcast that's dedicated to amplifying Black voices at UCR. I'm Dominique Beale from UCR's Community Engagement and Outreach Unit. In each episode, we'll be talking to UCR students, campus leaders, and community partners to explore the intersection of being Black and being a Highlander at UCR. And I can't wait for you to meet today's guest. Let's get started. Welcome back, everybody, to the Blue, Gold, and Black podcast. I am your host, Dominique Beale, and I'm super excited to have a special guest on with us today. We have Miss Shonte Thomas with us, who is our Associate Dean of Students and oversees the Ethnic and Gender Resource Center, Costo Hall at UCR. She just recently joined the UCR family in recent months, so we're super happy to have her on, super happy to amplify her voice and give her a big shout out. Ms. Thomas, how are you doing today?
I'm doing really well. Happy Tuesday.
Yes, super happy Tuesday. Thank you for joining us. We're super happy to have you. So if you could just, really briefly, so we can kind of firmly plant you here at UCR, just really quickly tell us what exactly your position entails.
Sure, definitely. Well, thanks so much for this opportunity to share space with you and whomever is listening. Hi, Highlanders and beyond.
Yes.
Today actually makes 2 months. So I've been
beautiful
2 months in. Thanks for that anniversary opportunity. So essentially, I am here to support, uplift, boost, shape, sponsor, all things ethnic and gender center relative. So there are 9 departments under my immediate purview. And, the goal is to really, again, make sure that, the work that they've done in a tremendous fashion is again, kind of elevated to the level that we are, really starting to firmly kind of plant and concretize the work that we're doing within the institution. And then all the other Dean of Student stuff. So, conduct is definitely still under my purview. I work directly with Dr. Christine Mata to, again, continue to support the entire student body and not necessarily those that are specifically constituents of the ethnic and gender centers.
Nice. Thank you. That's really, really great explanation of your position. And you came from one of our sister campuses, did you not?
I did. So I journeyed way down Southern California from University of California, Santa Cruz. So I worked at UCSC for 7 years as a director for the African American Resource and Cultural Center.
Wow.
And I'm also an alumna of UCSC. So I've spent, 11 years of my life as a slug.
Okay, cool. All right. Well, let's add a little bit more context into what seems to have been your work, definitely for the last 10 to 15 years. Tell us a little bit about where you grew up and some of the childhood experiences that you had that were kind of instrumental in who you are today.
Sure. So I am California born and bred.
Nice.
So born in Northern California, specifically San Jose, California. For those that don't know, which most people know San Jose now, It's about 45 minutes south of San Francisco. Lived there until I was 8 or so. And then my mother and I came back home to Southern California. And then I spent, most of my formative years in Carson, California, which is near like Long Beach and Torrance in the South Bay part of LA County.
Okay, nice. And so talk to us a little bit about those formative years back in Carson. What were some of the things that you experienced and what was kind of the attitude around education in your family, even at that young age?
Yeah, definitely. So I'm an only child. As I said, my mother and I traveled to Southern California, and then unfortunately, she became very ill and passed away. And then my grandmother said, "You're here. I love you. You've been a central part of my life. You're just gonna stay." And I said, "Okay, sure." Dad kind of gave the thumbs up. He was living in New York, and so from the point I was 9 or so until 18, I was with Granny. And education has always been a central focus, of our family's interests, but not just in the formal sense. Like going to college, clearly I'm a big proponent of it. I think it's important, but it's not the only way, that one can find themselves to be quote unquote educated. But I would say, in thinking about my grandmother's upbringing, she was the youngest of 13 kids. And I think of those 13 children, I would say probably 10 or 11 went to university in some context.
Wow.
Some folks had advanced degrees. So it definitely, again, was a central kind of understanding and framing of the way that my my matrilineal lineage has come through.
Yeah.
I don't know as much about like my father's history and family, but he was always supportive, of the education that I received. And, it's interesting, as being part of Generation X, it was, and me and my friends kind of joke about it, but it wasn't the expectation of if we're going to college, it's which college are you going to? So not only coming from a college going environment at home, that was part of my peer group. That was just part of, our expectation is that we definitely were going to venture towards some form, of higher education. And then I can get into a little bit more, but like an advanced degree, that's a whole other conversation. But there definitely was, an expectation within my immediate circle, my immediate familial structure to at the very least procure an undergraduate degree.
Wow, that's really amazing to also kind of be able to tap in, to that history a little bit, because it's not something that a lot of people, especially Black people, kind of have the opportunity to do, to kind of put into context where they are in their family and where their family is, in the broader sense. So that's really dope. So with education kind of being a huge focus, from your grandmother and, her extended family, her siblings and things like that. Talk to me a little bit about elementary school, and also to kind of start tying in, I guess, your setting in terms of like how you started identifying with your Blackness as well.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting. I don't know at what point I started identifying with my Blackness. It was just a central part of who I was, as a being. In San Jose and the time that I spent there weren't a lot of Black folks, but I was so rooted in my ethnicity, in my kind of racialized identity. There was never really too much of a question about that. And then when we shifted to Southern California, the area in which I grew up was very Black.
Right.
So Carson, for folks that are familiar with it, it's middle, upper class. But there's a large Black population in that area, and then with Compton near you, again, a lot of Black folks at the time. Now, the demographics have shifted over the last 20 years or so, but at the time, there were a lot of Black folks that lived in the area. And, most of the people that I went to elementary school with, middle school with, they were primarily Black. It was rare in a classroom setting prior to getting to high school that I would find myself as one of the few folk. Then come up to speed in thinking about the latter part of junior high, and I would say for most of my 10th grade year, being in magnet classes and higher education, thinking order class and things of that sort, there definitely was a shift, and I could see, that, for a lot of my Black friends and peers, we were no longer in classes, because we were in some of these, I don't know why I can't think of the word, it will come to me in a second, but, being part of kind of advanced placement classes, that's the word. I started to kind of see the shift as far as the folks that I grew up with in my neighborhood and the people that were in the actual classes with me. But generally speaking, I grew up in an environment that was relatively Black, but diverse in the same way.
Yeah.
Because again, while I was in an area that was highly populated with Black folk, in Carson, there were definitely other segments of Carson that maybe weren't as, I guess, Black centric. And we would all, kind of mesh together and really get along, which was ideal.
Yeah. So tie that in now, because that's great context, right? Because I think, the whole saying, Black folks aren't a monolith, right? We don't all necessarily get to, for one reason or another, grow up in an environment where maybe things are very Afrocentric or Black-centric just by, sheer proximity to other Black folks. And you kind of experienced that, right? Because at home, growing up in Carson, that's what you're around, that's what you're exposed to, elementary school, middle school. And then when we get to this sector in high school, that kind of changes. So can you kind of explain maybe what type of culture shock that was for you and how you kind of navigated high school during that time period?
Yeah, I don't even know if it was so much a culture shock. It was, for me, I saw it as an opportunity to just learn more about different folks and different people. So in Carson, we have a high population, again, of Black students. We have a high population of Pacific Islanders. So a lot of Samoan students were there, a lot of Filipino students, and not as many white students, but, there was a spackling. And, just to be able to be a part of, these rich and beautiful cultures is just something that I really appreciated and I really thought was the norm until you start talking to other folks and then you realize the homogenous ways in folks, the way people kind of come into their being. And I'm thinking like, wait, you've never had X? You've never experienced this? So it was interesting to talk to other people that didn't have my experience to know that it's generally been, kind of one or the other. Either they've been the very, few Black people in the area and they grew up around a lot of white folk, or they grew up around a lot of, our Latinx folks, or they just grew up in an area where it was a little bit mixed. And I think that was my experience. Again, while definitely kind of central focus is just Blackness. And I will make an interesting distinction. So Black centricity and then Afrocentricity definitely was a huge divide. I think about my family, most of my family, not all, but most of them would probably not say that it was an Afrocentric environment. So, when I think about like consciousness and I think about the way that I came into my understanding of my ancestry and of the ways in which, I identify, that happened later. But again, there was never a question about my Black identity. And I know we'll talk a little bit more about that in a bit. But I when you said that, I was like, if I talk to 3 or 4 people, like my elders in my family, they would think, yeah, nah.
Interesting.
So that was interesting, too, to be in an environment that was so rich, full of culture. But then there were still pieces, of the way in which we came into the Americas as Black people. Right. It wasn't really something that was a central focus of the conversations within like my family. That was more of an academic leaning, if I can be perfectly honest, and then me wanting to dig a little bit more and kind of understand, where we come from and how we came to be currently.
No, I think I'm glad that you made the distinction, because it is a unique distinction when in the way that we frame it, and I guess the way that we approach it is important. So thank you for making that. So talk to us now, like, your journey to higher education, right? So you've already mentioned at the top of the show that you went to UC Santa Cruz. And so talk to us, like, what was the decision that ultimately led you to UC Santa Cruz? Was it your first choice or was it your last choice? Talk to us a little bit about that journey.
And no shade to anyone watching it that doesn't understand the context of UC Santa Cruz. That wasn't my first choice. So the first choice, again, going back to consciousness and Black identity, my first choice was to go to HBCU. And I knew I was either going to Clark Atlanta or I was going to Spelman.
That's what it was.
They're both in Atlanta, and I thought, why not? Like, this is amazing. Again, California born and bred. Right. My understanding and kind of reckoning, so to speak, of HBCUs was through media. So A Different World was really popular. This doesn't crack sometimes, but I might be a lot older than what I look. But that's how, I was able to learn that was a possibility.
Right.
Again, diversity is beautiful. And I love, growing up with different folks from a different area. But to be able to tap into other Black folks, to your point, we are not a monolith by any stretch of the imagination. And I saw that, growing up in high school. But to be able to learn and engage and move to another state was also very exciting. And then my dreams were crushed.
No.
And my grandmother was not in approval. She did not. Wow. She did not think that would be a viable option for me.
Interesting.
And her thinking, and when I talked to some of my other peers and good friends, and some of their family members thought the same, is that's not reality. You're not going to grow up in this this little incubator where it's just all Black folk. And, my pushback at the time was, well, then let me have my fantasy world. Then let me live in this reality, for the 4 years or however long that I'm there. And no, that was not an option. And again, and I've changed as far as like my voice and where I see myself and advocating for myself. And at the time, when I think back, I just didn't do a good job of really like selling it. I was just like, I was like, okay, well, right. I'm going to go as far away as I can because I knew enough about me to know that I had lived a relatively sheltered life.
Okay.
I was a little self-aware.
Gotcha.
And I wanted that opportunity to really be independent, not wild out, but just do things on my own and really continue to kind of come into my own being. And again, being from, I don't claim Northern California, but being raised for the first 8 years of my life and then still having family there, I felt like I had a connection to NorCal. And I thought, you know what? Santa Cruz it is. Like, it's cute. They have a beach. They have a pier. Sure.
It's cute.
It's cute, from the pictures and the little bit of time I'd spent there. Yeah. But I had never formally visited the campus. So if anyone's listening and you're thinking about going to university, go to the campus. Talk to people. Make good decisions. So I applied to multiple UCs, all of which I was like, yeah, they're still too close. Like UCLA, too close. I was like, San Diego, too close. Santa Cruz, okay. Because again, I also bought into the hierarchy that we put in our UC and Cal State, that's a whole other conversation. I think prestige is great. I also think it's very subjective. We can talk about that later.
Yes, absolutely.
So again, I was like, okay, we'll go to Santa Cruz.
Gotcha.
Again, if I need to be home, I can be on a flight within an hour. Again, kind of speaking to the privilege. It would be no big deal if I were to go to this university. And it was a struggle. For the 4 years that I served at UC Santa Cruz, when I think about culture shock, the culture shock wasn't as deep rooted for me as it was for some of my other friends. But I think the difference for me, and I say this time and time again, is that when I entered Santa Cruz, I entered as a young lady, as a young girl, and I left as a Black woman because of the different ways in which life came at me. At UCSC, I was a politics major, education minor. Most of my politics classes were very, very white, very male identified, white male centric was really the focus, of a large amount of the classes and the targeted audience. Most of my professors were older white men. Most of the people in the classes were younger white men. And I felt more times than not to just not even be visible, which is ironic. My weight has fluctuated, but I've never been a thin person.
Right.
So I'm like, I know you see me. Like, it's so interesting how I'm invisible, but I take up space, literally. And at the time, probably not so much figuratively. I do that now, no ifs, ands, or buts. So it was just an interesting time to kind of go through, the development of becoming, who you are. I think a lot of people say that college really shaped who they are, and I would say undoubtedly it made a huge impact in me as an individual and someone that really not only valued education, but someone that saw themselves as an opportunity to maybe even be a conduit to other folks. And I know we're going to get a little bit into that, but it shaped me in so many ways. So while I kind of roll my eyes about Santa Cruz, I don't know if I would be who I am now, not going through that experience.
Yeah. And so, I know you're intentional with your words. So when you say that, you served 4 years at Santa Cruz, let's unpack that, because I really like the way you framed your experience as I entered as a young lady, right? But specifically, you exited as a Black woman. So talk to us about that concept of serving your time and the transformation that took place and the things that you were involved in that facilitated that transformation from you being a young lady to a Black woman.
Right. So folks that know things about Santa Cruz is that it's a highly active campus as far as like the organizing and the activism that comes from there. Now, at the time, I would never identify as an activist, but I was definitely involved in some organizing. I was involved in when Prop 209, I think maybe my first or second year, Prop 209 was big, and we, shut the campus down many, many times. I wasn't the central organizer, but I was definitely a part of that. Yeah. And even having those conversations with my grandmother, she's like, what are you doing? Like, you're there to get an education. Why are you involved in these different? And I'm like, A, why not? And B, it's like it's one kind of what you do, but also this is another way for me to learn. Like, I am someone who definitely is a big beneficiary of tactile, kinesthetic learning, and I need to actually do things in order to really understand not only my positioning in it, but to have a better sense of the context and kind of how we're moving through different things. So I thought, what greater way to really understand, what we are experiencing as younger folk, but also as minoritized identities. So that was part of it. Again, that was something I would have never done had I not have gone to Santa Cruz. I think, again, being able to utilize my voice. I won't ever really identify as a shy person, but I definitely can be really reserved. I didn't go into UC Santa Cruz with a lot of confidence. And I think I was not physically, but I was beat down in the classes, not really being given the opportunity to speak. And then when I did speak, folks would make a lot of assumptions about what would come out of my mouth. And I felt that and I heard that. So it was interesting to kind of be, again, most of us that go to, these universities, we're at the top of our class in high school, and now you're surrounded by all of these other quote unquote smart folks. Again, we can unpack what smartness and intelligence is, but you're in these classrooms where, these folks are coming with these really broad, comprehensive, academic vernacular, and you're thinking like, who are you? Like, aren't you 19 or 18 like the rest of us? Yeah. How and why? So you start to see the disparities. Again, I was very comfortable in, my world in Carson. And then you come and you're like, oh, private school, right? Oh, you went to school in Laguna Niguel. I had never been to Laguna Niguel. I mean, things like that. So you start to really see the ways in which many of us, think that we have an advanced level of education or different things that we're doing, and you start to see that those disparities are so key. So again, me recognizing and understanding that, and kind of seeing it happen in the classrooms with my professors, with the TAs, it shaped me to want to help and really create a better sense of equity.
And so,
at the end of the day,
yeah. And so, on that point, just really quickly before we kind of finish your transformation, right? Like that whole imposter syndrome. That Black students far too often experience, right? And despite the amount that they've already had to excel just to get there, to university or whatever that goal was, just to get there, and still for some reason feel like, well, maybe it was a fluke. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Maybe I'm not worthy. And like, looking back on how you were kind of identifying that as you were going through it, but looking back now, like what can we say to our Black students that are struggling with that chip on their shoulder, right? Because a lot of times that imposter feeling prevents them from going out and getting resources, right? Because they feel like, I should be able to do this by myself. I should be smart enough to, but it doesn't mean that they're lacking in capability. It's just that whole psychology behind it. How can we combat that for our Black students, or get them to combat that?
End racism.
You're right.
End it right now.
Right.
I think reminding folks, and I think the conversations I've had with not only my Black students, because again, that was my charge for 7 years, just that you're not here by accident. You are valued. The university needs you. Like, they need your voice. They need you to show up in your full authentic self. And they need you to be open to whatever that experience is, And again, I'm not saying that to negate folks, but I think for me, I'll use my I statement. For me, I wasn't open to it because I kind of thought I knew all the things. And I think there was a little bit of resistance for me, again, oddly lacking confidence, but also being like, no, I can do all of this, and not really being open to the resources that are there. I think, again, some of that is that pride. So it's weird. You have pride, but you also lack some confidence. And I think sometimes there's that struggle, and those are two kind of oppositional forces that sometimes get in your own way. So I would say find your people, find your pod, look into the resources, because you deserve them like every single other person. And I think more times than not, particularly folks that come from affluent backgrounds or people that come from white cultures, they know this, they recognize this, they tap into all the resources day one. And I would say, I think right? It's their right. It's their right to do that. It's their right to maximize every single experience. And I think, what I've seen time and time again is sometimes we don't do that because, again, pride. There's other things I'm sure that are at play. I know there's other things, but I think because we're like, specifically when I look at like my lower SES babies, my lower socioeconomic status folks that come from maybe impoverished backgrounds, I think again, the hood is behind them. They're like, you made it, you did it. And it's like, yes, I did. And I still need help. How do I ask for that help? Because now that I'm in the university setting, people have already, think that I've explored. I've kind of gone to this holy grail, which some elements, yes. And I think, again, that pressure, where you feel like you're in a pressure cooker and you can't really relieve it. So you release words. You can't really relieve that pressure so that you can then make yourself vulnerable to ask for the help. Asking for help does not mean that you don't have a deficiency. It doesn't mean that you're less than anyone else. It just means that, hey, this is a new world. This is a new environment. And I think, again, adapting to your new normal is something that we don't share up front. We don't really talk about like hidden curriculum. So in the work that I've done, I really try to put that at the forefront, of how we're moving, to say that everyone's new at the university, but some folks do have a step up. Some people have taken some, formal courses through different avenues and different venues. Some folks have a legacy of people going to the university. Yeah. So they really understand that that's really the only way that you move. That's the only way you kind of build your capital is by tapping into other folks. I try to, again, also demystify what a professor is, what that means to have a conversation with people that are in positions of power. So really just trying to get folks to understand that you're supposed to be here. Again, the UC, highly critical. And regardless of the UC, I want to dispel that too. I don't think, people like, oh, you only went to Santa Cruz. It's an amazing education if you want it to be. Yeah, I look at all universities, like you can get a top-notch education at most, not all, but most universities, if you want that to be your lot in life. And I think, again, that sometimes puts people at, kind of odds.
Yeah, no, and the concept of deserving is really, really important. And I always tell students like, yo, you gonna pay for them resources whether whether you use them or not. So like,
Yep.
if we want to just make it as simple as possible, like how much does $1 cost? And I
Yes.
really emphasize that to students because there's resources to help us unpack all of the psychology behind why we may not want to pursue those resources. But if you believe in getting your money's worth, like at the bottom line, then you need to tap in because it's so much value that gets added into the cost of your tuition and fees, which you're going to pay regardless. So definitely,
Exactly.
you deserve to tap into those resources. I want students
100%.
to know that.
And regardless, and I think there's a lot of amazing first generation initiatives out there to really support what we've talked about. But we look at the research. The research, there's still a gap, even if you're second generation. So again, I don't want to. I try not to put any particular demographic over another because we still see those gaps. We still see folks struggling more than what they need to. Like the struggle is real anyway. So don't put upon more work, more duress, more stress when other folks are out here just kind of knowing where to go and they're getting it.
And it's about access, right? It's about access. Because if you have access to the resources, it doesn't necessarily matter if it's quote unquote your resource or not. Somebody that can tap into that resource and share that knowledge with you and share that wealth. And that's exactly why I'm so happy to have you here in conversation, because it's important for students to know like who these people are in these positions that have access to the resource, right?
And I love that you're doing that because again, I see all of us as possibility models.
Yes.
Sometimes, and they say you can't see it unless you do it. You can, but it makes it that much more difficult.
Right.
And it helps to be able to see the variety in ways in which Black folks are impacting not only policy and procedures, but are literally just there to support folks. And I think, again, people get caught up with titles. I'm here to support students. So, when I become the vice chancellor of student affairs, because I'm putting it into the universe, I'm still going to be that approachable person because it's important. It's important for folks to know that we're here. I'm not here just for my own, and there's something to be said about being able to support someone who has some sort of similarity culturally, to what I've experienced. And if I can knock down doors, which is what I've done, I'll continue to do that because it's important.
Yeah, no, it's insanely important. And I think it's also critical for, folks in your roles who are trying to move into more senior positions, more executive level positions to stay tapped in because, it seems to be a common theme, but, the higher you rise, the farther away, through systems and institutions and hundreds of years of programming, you get pulled away from maybe what your focus was when you first got in. And so, that's why I love being able to, have folks like you on and share these stories because it's so critical. So I want to, before we get on our 15th tangent, I just kind of want to round out, finalizing, when you get ready to graduate college and you're leaving as a Black woman, just kind of paint that final picture for us before we just kind of dive into your professional career.
So I don't think I noted kind of the impetus for me studying politics, but it was as I noted, it was my grandmother and I prior to me going to college. But before my mother passed, there was an assumption that my grandmother was going to be in her home by herself. Not this little feeble woman, but she's like powerful. She's like 84 going on 60 and she's going to outlive all of us, God willing.
Right.
But she thought that she would be there by herself. So she tapped into the foster care system and really, wanted to become a foster care parent. So when my mother passed away, she was like, Sean, it's still a big house. We still have room. And I said, let's do it. I'm an only child. I'm like, great. I'll have another sister. So I lived for, 4 years, 3 to 4 years, 4 years, from the latter part of middle school through high school with maybe 6 to 7 different foster girls. And their experience shaped me in a variety of ways and just the ways in which life can really be awful. Again, recognizing how the environment I grew in and seeing, how some of these young ladies have thrived despite their environment. Yeah. So going to UCSC politics major, I was going to law school. because I was like, I want to be an attorney for the Department of Children and Family Services. This is ridiculous. I don't understand how this is allowed to happen. Yeah. I was like, thank goodness we're good people, but some of these social workers and some of these systems just are not set up to really support and benefit, our babies that are in these systems. So that was really my goal. I took the LSAT, scored relatively well, and I said, you know what? I need time off. I need a break. My brain hurts. I've been battling things beyond the academics here at this university. I just need time. But I needed a job. So I thought, let's become a substitute teacher. At the time, we could do an emergency credential. I then I went through, those steps and those processes, and that's pretty much all she wrote. Like I've maybe when I'm 60 and I'm retired, maybe I'll go back to law school. I won't, but it just sounds cute. But I always saw, again, like I know that equity was a big part of kind of what moved me and it continued to push me and want to strive to get better access to allow folks to really be able to excel in a way that wasn't as difficult as it was way difficult than what it needed to be. And I kind of saw that. And, I thought this is another way, again, going back to being a conduit, this is another way that I can support folks. So I taught in middle school for 4 years. I thought, hey, let's see what's going on in high school. Taught in high school. I didn't teach. I managed an after school program in high school, and it again, talk about shaping. These experiences are really transformative when you're able to not only use a different lens, but to able to, to be able to really experience what other folks, are walking through, these systems and how they're continuing to support not only themselves, but their families. So that 6 or 7 or 8 years or so, working specifically in the K-12 system was something that was just eye-opening. And it really allowed me to understand the bottlenecks that exist and the ways in which we still don't have this parity, that we're looking for to even give people access to get to higher ed.
And I think it puts in a lot more context into your work in higher ed. Like I'm relatively still new working within higher ed for sure, but education in general. But I'm happy that I even for a year and a half, 2 years, I started working at the high school level before I started working at, the higher education level, trying to now serve high school students, because it helps you see the full picture a little bit more, because you see the challenges that are faced in high school, which inevitably are going to lead to the challenges those same students will face if they can get into college. And I don't say if because of like a lack of capability, but I say if because even high school, it can be very difficult to maneuver, especially when we have to meet these different requirements, right? What is considered in a college preparatory course versus just a regular high school course, and does a school even have access to those courses? So what are we going to do for, so it's so many different things that you can touch on in that perspective, that kind of working within K through 12 in any capacity definitely really puts into perspective like what we're doing here in higher education and how important it is to make sure that, the resources are from our positions are flowing back into those K through 12 environments. So I do want to talk, a lot about what it meant for you to run, the African Resource Center at UCSC, because obviously that's going to be insanely critical influence on what you're going to do for us here at UCR as the overseer of all of the gender and ethnic resource centers. So talk to me about that experience of being, the leader of a UC campus African Resource Center in all of the wondrous stories you have with that.
Yeah. Oh, all the stories. We would need a separate podcast just for that.
We will get it done.
It meant everything. It meant everything to me. It meant everything to staff that I work with and students. And I don't say that to be like, popping my collar, but folks tell you enough to think like, oh, I had an impact. Okay, let's keep going. And I always want to say, let's make sure we're giving people their flowers while they're here. And my flower bed runneth over, particularly when I left. You really start to see like, oh, okay, good times. But again, going back to the start. So I started at UCSC in a professional capacity in 2013. I was at the point where I knew that I wanted to get into higher ed, but work at a brick and mortar. I was working for an educational consultant, and we would support I won't get into the nuances of it, but we would support different universities to help them launch their e-platform, which is ironic because that's what we're doing now.
Right.
We're all online.
Yeah.
And I still had, some wounds from me serving in Santa Cruz. So even when the idea was presented through a friend who knew a friend, it's important to keep your connections. They say, hey, resources. They're all there, and they're not just in the kind of transactional way. They are people. People are resources as well, which is why I love that you're doing this, because you're showing like these are people that you should talk to and get to know and kind of understand.
Send the email if you haven't noticed by now. Send the email.
Yes, please do.
Yeah.
So I was hesitant. I was like, why would I go back to Santa Cruz? Like that was awful. Hindsight is always 20/20. It wasn't awful, but it challenged me and it pushed me in a way that I wasn't ready for.
Okay.
There were parts of it that were beautiful when I was an undergrad. A lot of that is just the people that I connected with and the way that I'm still, really connected with some of these folks who I consider brothers and sisters. But going there, I said, you know what? Buck up, Shonte. Like, you can do this. Like, you're an adult now. You've experienced things.
Right.
And again, I knew that it was a risk, but it's a risk that I could afford to take. So I then took the interim position as a director, and I would say maybe day 2, I thought, this is my job, and I'm going to fight tooth and nail to get the permanent position because I need to be here, I want to be here, and it's important. And it was an opportunity for me to reconnect with Santa Cruz because, to be perfectly honest, as an alum, I didn't engage. My experience wasn't fruitful enough. My experience didn't lend me to be like, let me give dollars and let me go back during the reunion. I did none of that. I did none of that for the 14 years that I was away.
My university stay calling me asking for donations. I'm like, bruh. Y'all get rid of these loans. I'll send you my loan payments for donations.
Right. So it meant the world to be able to kind of reform and shape the center. The center at the time had been around for a long time. I'm going to say like 24 years. And it didn't have the punch that I think that it needed, particularly to support Black students who, when I was a student there, we made up like 0.2% of the population. When I came back in a professional capacity, we made up maybe 3.5%. So not a huge shift. More, yes. And also the general population increased. So it still didn't feel like we had made the strides.
Right.
So to be able to really to tap into kind of the ethos and really be able to support, all the folks within Pan-African identity was just what was amazing. I grew as a human. I continued to push and resist the institution because, again, they wanted to institutionalize us more times than not, but not necessarily in the way that was beneficial to the students. So to be able to, again, to build the confidence, because, again, the imposter syndrome doesn't stop when you get a degree.
Oh, no.
It manifests its way in a lot of different mechanisms in your life. So I even had to work through that. Am I Black enough to hold this title as a director for the African American Research and Cultural Center? Have I situated myself? Am I poised enough to sit at this table with these, heavy, senior executive leadership to then continue to fight for what I know the students needed and what they wanted? So again, these are still questions that are playing in my head at the time. And I'll be perfectly honest, like some of those would pop up over the course of the 7 years that I served in that role, but they definitely were more so on the beginning end because, again, you move through a lot of the ways in which you don't think you're capable or, again, deserving, and I had to kind of move through like, no, like you blackity black because you have a love for who you are as a Black person. Again, I recognize, and again, naming light skin privilege. Yes, that is definitely a thing. I recognize that I benefit from that. So let me try to leverage that. Let me make sure, again, if because you're whack, the only reason you're listening to me is because I'm like 2 shades darker than you, then you about to get all this. And and I'm about to bring, other folks in to make sure we have that opportunity. And I think more times than not, going back to your point, is sometimes we lose that the more that we ascend. I want to continue to stay true to who I am to make sure that I know that I move with a level of privilege. I need to still hold on to that for my students, for my colleagues, for my staff, because I didn't go into the role just to serve students. That was a large part of my position, but also recognizing that representation matters. And if that means that I had to support, some greener professional as they were coming in as a transplant from the Bronx, now you're in Santa Cruz, California, in like a forest with like deer and skunk, and I knew they were going to need that support. So I really, made it literally my business to be able to support as many folks as possible. because that really, the community feel was so important, not only again to the students, but all the Black folks, that were there at the university, but then also moving with that kind of diversity minded, equity minded reality to know that, none of us are free until we're free. So, how do we build that? How do we build that coalition? How do we move in a way that we are really galvanizing movement so that we're all supporting and down for us being free?
Yeah.
Because liberation is the goal.
Yes, absolutely. And the end of your point, is kind of the perfect segue into, my next question, because I want to bring the focus over here to UCR, and your work is going to be the same in the sense of championing, advocating for students, especially marginalized students. But the scope gets a little bit broader. And that kind of ties back in, right, to that aspect. Like when we ascend to these, different types of positions and our scope broadens, how are you making sure that with broadening your scope in terms of the specific groups of students who you now need to support and nurture and make sure that they're successful, how do we still manage to keep our Black students kind of central, just for lack of a better term, but kind of central in the way that we're navigating this space? Because I'm of the belief of, if you're going to promote and empower the Black students, that's inevitably going to empower all of the students around them. So talk to us a little bit about your approach to that.
I would say first and foremost is to tap into the energy that's there before me. I'm not coming into, I got all the answers. I have some answers. I have some expertise. I have some experience, but I also know that this is a different environment. And, and me kind of understanding the cultural pieces here at UC Riverside has been really key. I have a whole 2 months to have to be better, to be more mindful and to be really focused on learning kind of the culture here. I wish I could say that it's different, but there's a lot of things I'm just like, this looks really familiar. This feels so much like what I just experienced. So
institutions have a way of doing that, right?
Isn't that interesting?
Yeah. Very.
So I think for me, a large part of what at least I've done and what I'll continue to do is work through and with students. They need to be the central focus of what we're doing. And I think to your point, as far as like Black students, I think, again, we're in a movement. There's a window. The window's not huge, but there is a window right now, and we need to make sure that we're walking through it. The question of, and people say, well, why Black folks? Why not? It's usually my answer. I think, again, the whole concept of like Black Lives Matter. Nobody said only. But Black folks are the one that are literally on the end of, really, really highly, oppressive systems. And, we look at the disproportionate ways in which we're affected, not only in education, again, some folks, this is their goal is to get a degree from UC Riverside. That is beautiful. But there's so many others that didn't even get here. I think you use the not if you make it. I think that if factor is huge. Like who are we leaving out? Who's not at the table? Who are we not considering? And I go a step further because, again, intersectionality is a thing. Like I'm an intersectional being, as a Black queer woman. There's just different ways that I'm moving. There's different things, different energy that I'm moving with. So I recognize that, my Black trans babies are going to get it harder than, some of my Black cis babies. That's not to say that all the resources have to go to Black trans folk. And I know that there's a different level. There's a different playing field, unfortunately, for people that are hyper minoritized. So just moving with that energy. I am not a trans person. I don't understand that experience, personally, but I recognize and I know that it's difficult. I recognize and know that the disparities are real. So I think, again, me moving with a history and an experience and understanding of how the diverse ways that we're serving our students can't be and won't be enough. Just for me, kind of resting on my laurels. Thank you.
Laurels.
Words are hard sometimes.
They are.
So again, so understanding that and talking with students but not talking in the way, and this is something that I've already pushed back on a couple times, not talking in a way for me to understand what's happening or why it's happening, because I know that. I know the systems of oppression. I know, I get the institutions of higher education, but to be able to make sure that we're in touch with what students need and what they want. I don't ever want to put upon someone and say, I know you said this, but I know you actually need this. Now, there may be a piece of it. You said this. How about Tell me more about. I think that's different than me just assuming that I know all the things about what's happening on the front lines, because I don't, and I won't. I'm not there. I haven't been there, so I do sometimes have to remind folks. Let's just pause. Let's take a step back. And let's make sure, let's recalibrate and make sure that this is going to benefit not only our current students, because that's love students, but sometimes there is a short-sightedness, and that's just me being honest. Sometimes it's like what we need now. Yes, we need that now, but let's make sure this is going to benefit folks 5, 10, 15 years from now, just so we don't have to reinvent this wheel and come back to where we were, at this point. So I think, again, that's part of that administrative lens, is being able to not only reconcile, but being able to hold on to what's happening, but also making sure that it has an impact and an effect moving down the line. And that's something, again, that I'm broadening that. I'm having an opportunity to really make sure, again, that we are looking beyond the current context.
Yeah, no, and I've appreciated everything that you've shared so far, but I really appreciate you just flat out saying, like, sometimes our approach to these quote unquote issues can be short-sighted, right? And to me, that means, like, we've identified an issue. We might have even mobilized around that issue, right? We got people excited. We got people moving. We got people talking about it, but there's no organization around that newly formed mobilization and that energy. There's no one there to organize it and shape it, to make sure that that mobilization is organized into a full-blown movement, and then that movement becomes institutionalized, right? Yeah. Implement it into policy, implement it into practices. So even if the energy of the mobilization dies off, we already got it on the books. It's here. It's a new standard. And now we don't ever need to dip below that standard. And I just think that element is so critical, especially for, people in positions at these universities where they are decision makers, or they're at least talking directly to the decision maker and making sure that they're trying to implement these mobilizations, these movements into structural change. Because without the structural component, we're going to put out a bunch of statements and we're going to feel good about ourselves for a few weeks until we're knocking at this door again. And so I really appreciate you for sharing that. And it also kind of just leads me into my last question for our interview. Building off of that idea of short-sightedness and being able to look beyond that short-sightedness, right? That's what our ancestors were able to do. That's what allows me and you to be having this conversation. So just keeping within the spirit of that, what would you say is your most optimistic vision of the future when it comes to our Black scholars, not only here at UCR, but if you want to paint it in a broader sense, please feel free to do so.
So many things. Again, we don't have all the time in the world.
I know.
I think, simply put, I want students to just exist as a student, or Black students specifically. I want them to just be a student. I don't want them to feel the need to procure a building or occupy a building. I don't want them to have to, try to figure out how to organize and meet at the bell tower. That's what it's in my background. Again, because I'm 2 months in. Don't clown me. I'm still learning. We ain't gonna hold you to it. But I really want a Black student to be able to come in and, again, I've noted before, like, maximize their experience. Not have to then focus on trying to hold on to that student piece, but also now being a key, activist or organizer, because they're not getting their fundamental needs. And I think, again, if we can get to that point, we've arrived in so many ways. But, unfortunately, more times than not, our Black students, because we're talking about Black students, feel that that's really their only way to kind of move through, is to fight and resist and battle, and kind of lose sight of why they're there. That's something I would tell people in Santa Cruz, like, you're not here to surf. You're not here to hang out with the deer. You're here to get an education. And when that education is now on the back burner, that's now supplementary, then we've lost as the administration, as practitioners, we've lost a lot, because we're not holding up our end of the bargain. When you said you wanted to come to us, we've now created an environment where you can't solely focus on your education, and that's unfortunate. And unfortunately, we've been doing that since the beginning. So again, this is my little hope for the world, is that folks can come in and just be a student. And it just, and I think more times than not, because again, not all, I try to stay away from absolutism, but I think, most of our students, particularly our Black students, I think they do get caught up in that because they feel that's their only way to move through, because we continue to create barriers. And I say I'm part of that. I'm part of that cog, so to speak. But that's what I would hope and wish, for the future, is that a Black student can just come into Riverside and, do their bid. That's not to say to minimize that. I need everyone I need you to go explore. Once we're out of COVID, I want folks to, go out of the country and get that experience. I want people to be able to access the different intern and externships that are available to them, so that, they're building their capital. So when they leave, they have a network, they have resources that they can tap into. So that's kind of my answer. I want them to just be a student.
Yeah, absolutely. To just simply be able to exist in, their most happy self. I think that's what we're all pushing towards and fighting towards. And so, I want to encourage students, being honest with them, like, we're not at that point. We're not at that point, not speaking in absolutes, but, we do still have that obligation for future generations. We haven't kind of reached that point where we're absolved of that, that calling or that need to, resist. But now is more important than ever to advocate for yourself, at the least, because I think what gets lost is in that self-advocacy, you're advocating for other students, whether you know it or not. There's always going to be at least one more student who has it just as rough as you, or just as good as you, and still needs more, whatever, however you want to slice it and dice it. And so I want to encourage students to still have that passion, that attitude to want more for themselves and to want more for their people, and to just put the final button on it. Tap in, email these folks. It don't matter how many fancy words they got in front of their name, right? Associate Vice Chancellor, Associate Dean of Students, the Provost of this, the Academic Advisor of that. If you take nothing else away from, this show and Miss Thomas here, is that we have people in these positions that want to be in touch with you, that want to assist you, and their hands are extended, right? You just have to be willing to reach out sometimes. So,
and some of us need that. I'll just be perfectly honest. I think, again, and I know we're running short on time, but the stark differences I've seen in coming from Santa Cruz Riverside, there's a lot of Black folks that are on staff and that are faculty here compared to Santa Cruz. And I again, just to belabor the point, there's a lot of folks here that really want and need that interaction. You know, again, there's a lot of Black folks here, but depending on where they are, again, I don't know, but maybe there's not a lot of Black folks in anthropology. I don't know. I'm still learning, but they really want that connection, and we're Black folks first and foremost. And, we love our people and we want and we need that connection. I'm gonna connect with everyone. I'm gonna vibe with everyone, because that's just, that's me. That's how I roll. But there's also something to be said. Again, I think, we tend to get nervous, again, you're a Dr. So-and-so. That's cool. I can show you how to become a Dr. So-and-so, but let's just sit down and have a conversation. Because at the end of the day, we are two humans, we are two Black folk. And we, anyone that I've ran into thus far for the first 2 months, they really want to center needs and the student needs. So I think students just need to know, we're here for them and we want to see them succeed. But I will say that doesn't mean that you're going to hear everything that you want to hear. I move with the level of I can be mom, I can be auntie, but I'm also going to move with that mama love. I'm not going to appease you and tell you everything. Sometimes you need a little kick.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I think we need to be ready for that, because I come with that kind of familial, vibe as well. So it's just, again, to your point, I love that you're doing this. I've seen a little sneak peek of some of the people you've interviewed, and there's some fancy titles, but these people are here to support and continue to uplift, the student need and student interest. So definitely email us. I would say come by our office, but it's COVID time. So when we get back on campus, come to our office.
Yes. Fancy titles, but real people. You know what I'm saying? Yes. Fancy titles, but real people. So
that should be the sub name of this podcast.
We're going to have to sneak that one in there real quick. But we're at the end of our interview. I mean, obviously, we could go on for hours and hours more, which definitely means you're going to have to make another appearance on the show so we can really start unpacking this whole concept of equity and how we service marginalized students, how we support Black students. But Ms. Thomas, we were super happy to amplify your voice on Blue, Gold, and Black. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks so much for the invitation. This was fun. So I look forward to talking with y'all in a Zoom call or an email, but definitely, again, plug in and connect, tap into your resources. We're here to support y'all.
For sure. All right, y'all. We'll catch you guys later.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you for joining us on Blue, Gold, and Black. This program is produced by the Community Engagement and Outreach Unit of Undergraduate Admissions at the University of California, Riverside. Learn more about attending UCR by visiting admissions.ucr.edu, and be sure to check out the description for other useful links and resources. Help support this podcast by liking, subscribing, and sharing. And be sure to check out our podcast videos on YouTube. Catch you guys later.